Yay, I'm back! Two things before we get started. Number one, this is my first vlog brought to you by my new computer. Number two, since I now no longer have an excuse to not make videos more regularly, you'll probably be seeing me once a week, hopefully. So today, I want to talk about poetry. Before you go, hear me out. See, some of you are already like, boo, poetry sucks. And that's exactly what I want to talk about, the cultural bias against poetry. And if you're not like that, stick around anyway, you might learn something, even if you don't hate poetry like most of Western society. And by the way, isn't it terrible that the collection of countries most capable of getting an education and reading is also the most apathetic about reading? Now we know why it's called apathetic, right? Right? Okay. This isn't a video trying to guilt you into picking up a poetry book and reading it, but hopefully it will make you want to read poetry. At least once you understand why you first don't. And why don't you? That's because of an unfair question. Or perhaps a series of questions that people are almost programmed to ask when they're confronted with poetry.
What does the author mean by this?
What is the point?
What's the hidden meaning?
Why are those unfair questions? Well, to start off, we don't ask those of other mediums. We don't ask those questions with TV or movies, but with poetry, all the time. And in class, you might have seen students, or worse, teachers, try to explain what the hidden meaning behind something is, or at least try to give a definitive meaning on a poem. And when they do that, you kind of just have to, take their word for it, because it doesn't always make sense within the context of your life. Like, I was talking about this book series, The Hunger Games, on this website called Reddit.
Nerd alert!
And someone said something about how the advertising of the movie for The Hunger Games was very similar to the advertising for Twilight. And they went on to talk about how they didn't want Twilight fans becoming fans of The Hunger Games. Eventually someone stepped in and was like, why do you care? And to that some guy was all,
oh, well, Twilight is just a stupid love story, while The Hunger Games represents its value in comparing the symbol of the capital to modern capitalism, and it's basically a commentary on overconsumption.
And so I was like, you read 3 books because you liked the commentary on overconsumption? That's why you like The Hunger Games? And of course he was like, no, I like the action and the story. And so I was like,
The Hunger Games is just an action story, while Twilight talks about love and obsession and how those are driving forces in people's lives.
He didn't comment on that. Let's digest this. Everything, even Twilight, can have meaning. Are meanings hidden for you? No, not so much. The author isn't going to hide a meaning for you to find. Mostly the author just wants to write a story that you can enjoy. What you make of it, and how you reconstruct that story within the context of your own life, is important, but not a definitive answer to a question that shouldn't be asked. Because your meaning could be just as correct as someone else's meanings, and they could be very different. How is this possible? Metaphor. Particularly with poetry, metaphor means most importantly that there are lots of right answers. Of course, there's also a collection of wrong answers. Like if you said Twilight was about a bunch of dogs going on a dog road trip with their dog dads to Dog Denver, you'd be incorrect. But you would be right if you said that it's a story for love and how great that can be. But you would also be right if you said it was a story against love and how obsession is too similar to love. So how does all this lead people to dislike poetry? First, people are asking questions that don't have one answer, and also that don't have an answer at all, really. They're asking questions that require you put forth your own answer. People don't like to do that. People have this fear of being wrong. And also, poetry is this art of compact metaphor, which sometimes people confuse for just this flowery and useless language. And speaking to that, I'll read you a poem. Now, this one's meaning should be both easy to understand and pretty universal, but I encourage you to take a harder poem and read that and come up with your own meaning, and it doesn't have to be what everyone else thinks, but it could mean something in your own life. Read it keeping in mind that how you interpret it in your own life gives that poetry life. And now Litany by Billy Collins. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the burning wheel of the sun, the white apron on the baker, and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There's just no way you're the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's hat. But you're not even close to the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner, nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing in the alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I'm also the moon in the trees, and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I'm not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife. Not to mention the crystal goblet, and somehow, the wine. See you guys next week.